All right, Tori. So now we're going to jump into the comprehension portion of our work today. So later, you're going to be working with a new text called Abraham Lincoln. First, Ms. Hanson is going to model a comprehension strategy for you, though, that should help you hone in on specificity when you are responding to any prompt you are asked after reading the text. So I'm going to give you a copy of the text you have right here, and you're going to follow along with me while I'm reading. The text is called The Lifeline of the Nile. So you're going to take notes of what I'm doing while I read. For the top part, half of your paper, it's all about reading, okay? So go ahead and write reading right there. So you're going to take notes right there while I'm reading. And then you can draw a line about halfway through the paper. And the next part is going to be, you can put E/I strategies. And we will talk about that, what that means in a moment. All right, so for our main objective today, for comprehension, you're going to listen to how I answer my implicit and explicit questions after I read. Okay, so you're always making sure that you restate the prompt, question, and the answer. You're always making sure what? Yeah, so make sure whatever it is asking you in the question that you restate it when you answer it. Okay? So after listening to my intro about our objective, what am I going to be teaching you how to do?
Explicit and implicit strategies?
Yeah. So I'm going to be teaching you strategies about how to answer explicit and implicit question types. Two different strategies about that. But first, I am going to read. So I'm going to go ahead and get my text. You're following along right here, so you can take notes here, how when you do your annotations, and you can take notes of what I'm doing here. So annotations here, and notes of what Ms. Hanson's doing here. All right, remember our strategy with our index finger. What is that for?
To help me understand.
Right. So if I need to repeat anything, or if you don't understand anything, make sure you do that. So here, what are you doing? Taking down what? Annotations, right? Notes alongside while I'm reading. And then over here, you take notes of what I'm doing. So this is actually what the text is about. This is what Ms. Hanson is doing. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading. Remember, you're taking notes over here of what I'm doing and notes on this page of what is important about the text. All right. The lifeline of the Nile. The Nile River is the longest river in the world. It begins in East Africa and flows northward into Egypt. I'm underlining longest river in the world and where it starts in Africa and flowing towards Egypt. Surrounded by hot, sandy deserts, the Nile brought life to the people who lived by it. In ancient Egypt, it brought life to people, circling that. The Nile irrigated land that stretched about 5 miles on both sides of the river. This is where Egyptian civilization began and agriculture thrived. Right? Then we have the map showing where it's going there. Okay, going to that next paragraph. The Nile overflowed or ran over. So I'll circle overflowed and put ran over because of heavy rains in East Africa. People living near the Nile planted seeds after the floods and harvested in late summer. So farmers, I would circle that, harvesting by the river. They called this area Black Land because the land was very fertile. So fertile, circle that. I will put great farming. Wheat and barley, I'm underlining those two things, were the most important crops, circling that word crops, in ancient Egypt. Papyrus, circle that, was another valuable crop, circle crop. Okay, some very important crops growing there. The Egyptians used its stems. So a stem, you can draw like a flower and put the little stem line underneath it with leaves, was used to make paper. So the Egyptians used papyrus stems, or the end of the stem, to make paper. The paper making process involved cutting thin strips from the plant stems and placing them together. When the pressed strips dried, they produced a smooth surface. Papyrus became widely used for record keeping. So for record keeping, I'm going to circle that and put writing. For record the words record keeping, I'm circling those two words and putting writing out beside. The Nile was also a means of transporting goods. However, the geography of the Nile caused some roadblocks for travelers. 6 cataracts. Ooh, I don't know that vocabulary word. I'm going to circle that word, cataracts. 6 cataracts, or, oh, it just told me what it is, waterfalls. So I will put equals, so cataracts equal waterfalls. Break up the flow of the Nile. The cataracts, which we just learned are what? Waterfalls. Make it impossible to sail south to East Africa without taking a boat out of the water and carrying it. Because the river moves from south to north, a boat also needs sails to move it. Right. The Nile gave the Egyptians many gifts, but it also caused problems. Although the Nile did flood regularly, it did not always do so in the same way. Sometimes heavy rain caused too much water to overflow. Crops were destroyed, so I'm going to underline heavy rains, and then circle or underline crops destroyed. And people lost their lives, so circle that and put death. Other times, the Nile did not flood enough, and crops could not grow. So put could not grow, and then Nile water, and then underline did not flow. When this happened, Egyptians used the food they stored from surplus harvest. Surplus, you can put extra underneath that and circle that word, surplus. All right. So now I can set my text to the side. And Tori, what did you notice that I did after you listened to me read aloud that would help you, or that helped me, be a better reader comprehending texts?
You were saying what you were annotating down, and you were jotting down notes as you needed.
Great. So I made sure I annotated, took down notes, and then I was also making sure I read completely through the words. I what?
Read completely through the words.
Right, because that's always important. All right. So now I've read my text, The Lifeline of the Nile, and I'm going to go to the end of my text now. So I'm going to go and I am going to scan over the questions that I'm about to have to answer. So I see there's 8 questions. Implicit, explicit. Okay. So now, on that second part you're going to start taking notes on for the EI strategies, we're about to learn about explicit and implicit comprehension strategies. And those are types of questions. So you can circle implicit and explicit, or EI, and put types of questions. Types of questions. Because explicit and implicit, as you're going to learn, are different types of questions. They're what?
Different types of questions.
Yeah. All right. So, I'm going to go ahead and set my timer. So, for the first question, I see it says implicit. So, for number 1, you should write I or implicit. I know that means I use my text like always, but I have to go a little deeper in my brain. I have to do what?
Go a little bit deeper in your brain.
Yeah, I remember this because of the I in implicit. So, the I at the beginning of what?
Implicit.
Yeah, so you can put I and then write equals isn't all the way in the text. So, I for implicit, I for what?
Implicit.
Means it isn't all the way in the text. Isn't all the way in the text. All right, so that means I have to go deeper. I have to go what?
Deeper.
All right, so I have to go deeper for implicit questions in my brain. In what?
Implicit.
Yep. Yep. All right, so now I remember that again because of the I in implicit means isn't all the way in the text. So the question number 1 asks, what is this passage mostly or mainly about? So I know that's like a summary, and I obviously can't say or write the whole 4 paragraphs that I just read, right? So I'm also about to make sure I say the prompt question in my answer. I say the prompt in my... All right, so we always say the prompt in our... All right, we always say the prompt in our answer. All right, so I am about to say the prompt or question in my answer. The passage is mainly about the importance of the Nile River to ancient Egypt, or how the Nile River helped in ancient Egypt. And I went right back to my text to find that, thinking about evidence, right? And then I had to go deeper. So I thought about like a summary, because I can't copy down the whole thing, but I thought about the passage, what it's mostly about. It's mainly about the importance of the Nile River overall to ancient Egypt, or how it helped in ancient Egypt. All right, so now you can write number 2. So number 2 says that it is explicit. So I'm putting E for explicit. Putting an E for what? All right, so number 2 is E for explicit. E for what?
Explicit.
All right. And I know that E for explicit to me stands for evidence coming straight from the text. E to me is evidence coming straight from the what? All right, evidence straight from the text. Evidence straight from the text. Great. So remember, I isn't all the way in the text, so you have to use your brain. But E for explicit, you get straight from the what? And what are you getting straight from the text? Yeah. All right, so number 2 is explicit. So the question asks, why did the Nile River overflow? So I know that means I'm going to go straight into the text to find the evidence for my answer. I also am about to say the prompt or question in my answer. So I'm looking in the text, and I'm looking for why the Nile River overflowed. I see there in that second paragraph. So now I'm going to say my answer. The Nile River overflows due to heavy rains in East Africa. So I was able to see that straight from the text evidence. Because remember, this is an explicit question, so it means I get my evidence straight from the text. It means I get my evidence, and then I repeated what in my answer? Yeah, you always repeat the prompt in all your answers. And then I got my evidence straight from the text because it was explicit. If it was an I, that means what? Yeah, an I isn't all the way in the text, so you have to go deeper where? Yeah, you have to go deeper in your brain because the answer is not directly in the text. Cool. So number 3 says explicit. Number 3 says what? Explicit. All right, so I know that means evidence straight from the text. So it says, or it asks, name one important crop that Egyptians grew. So I know that means I'm going to go straight into the text. And I remember earlier when I was annotating, I actually circled 3 crops: wheat, barley, and papyrus. All right, cool. So one important crop that the Egyptians grew was wheat, right? Any of those would have been right, but it did only ask me for one crop. So I was able to see that straight from my text evidence that I annotated earlier, okay? Number 4 says implicit. So I know I means it isn't all the way in the text, right? So I'm going to have to go deeper in my brain. So it asked me, how do we know the ancient Egyptians were a literate people? That is, they could read and write. So I'm about to say the prompt or question in my head in the answer. So I remember this part. So from the text, I remember I circled that as one of the crops. So the ancient Egyptians were a literate people, or good reading and writing, since it said they had the crop of papyrus. And papyrus's stems that I drew that picture of earlier when I was annotating are used to make paper. So it said that in the text, so I know that that means they are literate or they can read and write, right? Because they're writing on that paper. All right, number 5 says implicit. I know that means I used my text like always, but I have to go a little deeper in my brain because it isn't all the way in the text, that I for implicit. Okay, so the question says, why did the Egyptians store surplus? And I remember I circled that word earlier, and I remember it meant extra. Why do the Egyptians store surplus or extra food? So I'm about to say the prompt question in my answer. Remember, this is implicit, so I'm going deeper in my brain. It isn't all the way in the text. So I'm looking back in the text for a little bit of evidence. At that bottom part, it was talking about why they stored food. Oh, because of the river, I remember. The ancient Egyptians stored surplus or extra food since the Nile River often floods. Remember, it could destroy crops and kill people. And sometimes, though, it also did not flood enough to water the crops, so food did not grow from lack of water. So that's my answer. Number 6 says explicit. So I know that's evidence straight from the text. So I remember this. Again, the E stands for evidence straight from the text. So the question asked for number 6, what's another word for waterfall? I remember annotating that specifically earlier. I circled it and put what it equaled. So that means I went straight back to the text to find my evidence, okay, and where I annotated. So now I'm going to make sure I say the prompt that was in the question in my answer. So another word for waterfall, according to the text in that 3rd paragraph, is cataracts. I was able to see that straight from the text evidence. Number 7 says explicit. So that means I use my text like always. I remember this because of the E, that means evidence straight from the text. And it asks in the question, in what direction did the Nile flow? And I remember underlining that actually at the beginning. So I went right back to the text. And I know that means I'm, again, looking for evidence, which I just found. The Nile flowed, according to the text in the first sentence, begins in East Africa and flows northward into Egypt. So I was able to see that straight from the text evidence. All right, for the last question, number 8, it says implicit. So for number 8, you can put an I for implicit. Remember, that isn't all the way in the text. You have to go deeper in your brain. So the question asks, why would a boat need to sail to travel to the south? So I'm going to say the prompt, question and my answer. Okay, a boat needs to sail to travel to the south. And I remember that part. It said, partly in the text, but I have to go deeper in my brain. It said cataract or waterfall make it impossible to sail south to East Africa without taking a boat out of the water and carrying it. It also said because the river moves from south to north. So a boat also needed sails to move it. If the river is moving from north to south, I know that I would need a sail to travel. Otherwise, you'd be going against the river current, so it would push your boat, right? So you need that sail to hold you steady. All right. So, Tori, after you listened to me answer the implicit and explicit questions, what did you notice is the strategies? I used a couple of strategies that would help me be a better reader to comprehend text questions. What are 2 things that I did?
For like the I.
Okay, the I, and what did the I stand for?
Isn't all the way in the text.
Yeah, so you have to go deeper in your brain to figure out those questions. And then what about the E?
Evidence straight from the text.
Yeah, those are explicit questions. The evidence comes straight from the text. And then before I would answer any question, what did I make sure that I did?
Answer the prompt.
Yeah, you have to say the prompt in your answer. So whatever the question was, you have to restate the prompt. You have to do what? Right.
Restate the prompt.
Right, and that's part of our objective today. So, in a second, by the end of this session, you're going to be consistently restating the prompt to answer both implicit and explicit questions. So you're going to make sure you're restating the what? So you're restating the prompt. You're doing what? Yeah, you're restating the prompt. And then you're doing that to make sure that you're answering explicit and implicit questions. Explicit and? Yeah, explicit and implicit questions. I know that's a difficult word to pronounce, and they sound very similar. All right, so in a second, you're going to go ahead and read your text. So it's the Abraham Lincoln text, and you are going to annotate while you read, just like a good reader. All right, so go ahead and start reading your text.
When Abraham Lincoln was 19 years old, he visited the city of New York, Orleans. He saw things he would never forget. He saw black people being sold in slave markets. They were chained together and treated like animals. Lincoln watched little children being sold to strangers and taken away from their parents. Lincoln was heartbroken, and these memories stayed with him for the rest of his life. Although slavery was allowed in many states in the Union, Lincoln believed that it was wrong, and he was not afraid to say so. In 1858, Lincoln ran for the United States Senate against Stephen Douglas. There was much talk about slavery. Should the owning of slaves be allowed in the new states that were just coming into the Union? Douglas said that the decision to own slaves is up to each individual person. Lincoln and that slavery must not be allowed to be spread because it was wrong. But he knew it would not be easy to end slavery in those states that had allowed it for so many years. Lincoln believed it was important to keep the United States strong. He felt that slavery weakened the country. In one speech, he said the country could not last half slave and half free. He said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Lincoln lost the election at the Senate, but he became well known for his views. In 1860, he ran for president of the United States. The slave states opposed Lincoln as president. They did not want to abolish slavery. They threatened to leave the Union if Lincoln was elected. When he became president, the slave states carried out their threat. A terrible war broke out between the northern and the southern states. At times, members of the same family were fighting against one another. In 1863, Lincoln gave an order called the Emancipation.
You got the first word. Keep going.
Emancipation Proclamation,
Excellent.
which ended slavery. The war finally ended 2 years later. The Southern states once more became part of the Union, but slavery was no longer allowed. No more were little children be torn from their parents and sold to strangers. Abraham Lincoln had achieved his goal.
All right. So now you finished annotating and reading your first text. So you're going to use the text just like you know. Remember to use your comprehension strategy for implicit and explicit question types. What is the implicit strategy? The I stands for what?
Is it all the way in the text?
So you have to do what?
Go deeper in my brain.
Yep. And then for explicit question types, the E stands for what?
Evidence straight from the text.
Yeah. And then you always make sure you're doing what when you answer the questions?
Restating the prompt.
Yeah, you restate the prompt to answer all the questions and then making sure you're using your I implicit and E explicit strategies. All right? And each question lets you know what type they are. Okay, go ahead. All right, you beat your timer for reading. Go ahead and start your timer for your questions. When you get done with number 1, go ahead and use your index finger strategy and let me know when you're done. Writing your answer. All right, Tori, so it said, what was Abraham Lincoln's main goal?
I said his main goal was to have slavery stopped.
Okay, so the only thing I would push you to do for the next question, when it's an implicit like that, is to make sure you state his whole name. So you said his main goal. I would say Abraham Lincoln's main goal was to have slavery stopped or ended in where? Where are we?
United States.
Yeah, great. All right, so go ahead with number 2. Make sure you're using all your strategies, restating the prompt, your I and your E strategy. So number 2 is an E. Remember to use your index finger when you're done. Number 2. All right, Tori, we're about to wrap up number 2. Ready? Perfect timing. Okay, name one thing that Abraham Lincoln saw in the slave markets of New Orleans.
I said Abraham Lincoln saw black people being sold in slave markets.
excellent job going right back to the text, making sure that you are specific, saying his name and using your strategy to make sure you restated the prompt. The only thing I would push you to do next time is where it said slave markets of New Orleans. Okay? All right. So now we're moving on to number 3. It says, how did the sites of the slave market influence Abraham Lincoln's later life? So this one's implicit. All right, it should be wrapping up number 3 in just a few seconds. Ariana, you can go ahead and exit to your next class, honey. Thank you for working on your essay the entire time. Don't forget your computer. All right, Tori, we're going to go over number 3 in 10 seconds. Have a good day. All right, let's go ahead and look at number 3. So it says, how did the sites of the slave market influence Abraham Lincoln's later life? What did you put?
I put Abraham Lincoln's sites wanted the slave markets in New Orleans to stop.
All right, so I really liked how specific you were with the slave markets in New Orleans, and then you said his sites. So you could have just made that stronger by saying the sites that Abraham Lincoln saw influenced him to make him want the slave markets in New Orleans to stop. Good job so far. Okay, go ahead with number 4. What office did Abraham Lincoln run for against Douglas? You're looking for explicit evidence. Okay, what did you put?
Abraham Lincoln ran for the United States Senate against Stephen Douglas.
Excellent. Go to number 5. Remember, it's explicit, so you're looking straight from the... Great, keep going. What did the southern states threaten to do if Abraham Lincoln was elected president? keep going. Okay, what did you put for number 5?
I said when Abraham Lincoln became president, the slave states carried out their threats.
The slave states what?
Carried out their threats.
Okay, and what did they threaten?
They threatened that
Make sure you write that down. Add that detail.
they would leave the Union if Lincoln was elected.
Okay, go ahead and add that. Okay, number 6. Why did the southern states oppose Abraham Lincoln as president? So this is implicit, going deeper into our brain. Okay, what did you put for number 6?
I said the southern states opposed Abraham Lincoln as president because they would start war if Abraham Lincoln did.
If he did what?
If he was like elected.
Okay. And number 7. How did Abraham Lincoln's prediction, a house divided against itself cannot stand, come true?